Oi, oi, all right, how's it going? I'm Grant, your you. This is the Doodle Review coming through with a new album to give a spin, chat some craft about, and then assign an arbitrary score to. Today, we're looking at Heavy Lifting, the first album in over 50 years from proto-punk legends, the MC5. The guitarists Wayne Kramer and Fred Sonic Smith initially met at school, sharing a love of rhythm and blues, soul, and the nascent rock and roll music, forming a band called the Bounty Hunters in the mid 60s. They made headway and gained acclaim as a workhorse cover band, drawing crowds such that they could play music full time. The band was seeking a manager and were introduced to Rob DeMiner, an older guy who was deeply entrenched in grassroots political movements. Kramer and Smith discovered pretty quickly that this guy they'd initially approached as a manager had a charisma and presence to him that couldn't be anywhere other than the front of stage. So DeMiner, now vocalist, changed his name to Rob Tyner, and shortly after, Dennis Thompson joined on drums and Michael Davis on bass. And the decision was made to rename to the Motor City 5 or MC5 as an homage to their Detroit roots, the epicenter of the American automotive industry at that time. The band in this formation was a powerful force, playing every night they possibly could, leaving audiences decimated in their wake. It then wasn't long before MC5's foundation as a cover band that knew bangers by the Stones, Hendrix, and The Who, and Little Richard, and Ray Charles inside and out. They started to take on outside influences. Not only were the band among a scene of Midwest garage rock bands like the Shy Guys and Question Mark and the Mysterians, who were translating the British invasion sound through a more kind of muscular American sensibility, but Kramer and Smith were getting turned on to the free jazz of Sun Ra and John Coltrane. And John Sinclair, the man who eventually did take the role of manager, was deeply entrenched in political activism and, of course, add to the recipe acid, lots of acid. Put all of these factors into the melting pot, and you get a band that truly, to my mind, sparked what the culture came to brand as punk a whole decade later. Kick Out the Jams, the band's first album released in 1969, is insane. It's a live album, it's visceral, it's electric, it's iconic, blending covers of Nat King Cole, John Lee Hooker, and the Trogs with tracks inspired by Sun Ra, and of course, the lightning in a bottle of Kick Out the Jams. This album is absolutely one of the greatest of all time. Kramer has said in the years since this album's release that he can hear all types of mistakes in the recording, and that the performance wise it wasn't their strongest, but something happened that night in October 68 when they recorded it. There's just magic in that tape, in that vinyl. Despite the legacy of this album at the time, the band's anti-establishment volatility and just being punk as fuck before that was even a thing ultimately got them dropped from Elektra Records, and so began a wild and checkered journey for the MC5. They were picked up again by Atlantic, who paired them with future Springsteen producer John Landau for their next album back in the USA. And while this album is still heralded as influential, particularly among future icons like Lemmy, I personally don't rate it anywhere near as highly as Kick Out the Jams. In his seeming aversion to the counterculture psychedelic movement, Landau stripped the MC5 down to their 50s rock and roll influences, cleaned up the sound, and in the process, removed the magic of their ferocious debut. Don't get me wrong, these tracks are great, and Landau didn't interfere with the band's like countercultural ideology or spirit. The recording just lacks the oral potency of Kick Out the Jams. It lacks the energy and the freedom. Fortunately, the band were given much more creative control when it was time for the follow-up, 1971's High Time, a studio recording that feels dirtier, the way you get when you use actual live takes, and the arrangements were allowed to roam free once more. Sadly, though, this is kind of where the MC5's momentum stopped. Harder Drugs were in the picture at this point. The counterculture was kind of fracturing. They'd fallen out with their management. Sales weren't there. And before long, the band dissolved, with both Kramer and Davis actually both ending up in prison for drug possession through the mid-70s for a number of years. In the years since, members have moved in and out of other projects, and several MC5 reunions have been mounted in various forms, although without Rob Tyner or Fred Smith, who both passed in the early 90s. I recently put together a deep dive on Mark Lanigan's Bubblegum record, and in sifting through interviews, I also found that the Night Porter himself was due to join as a vocalist for a tour in the mid 2000s, but sadly, this never came to fruition. And Handsome Dick Manitoba, formerly of the Dictators, filled the position from 2005 to 2012 when original bassist Michael Davis passed away. A decade later, and in celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Motor City 5, Kramer announced in 2022 the We Are All MC5 tour that saw a wide variety of musicians come together to tour the States. And among that announcement was the reveal of Heavy Lifting, the first MC5 album of original material in 53 years that we're here to talk about. Now, I've taken a long time to get here because I really want to pay tribute to this important band and pay respects, because this album is just not for me, sadly. The MC5, their music, their spirit, their attitude, the influence is insane. From their little brother band, The Stooges, and the impact they made, to Motorhead, to Rage Against the Machine, and countless others who, as per the nature of the beast, went on to actually get bigger success and make more money and are known by more people than MC5. It just can't be understated how important the legacy of this band is. Heavy Lifting was dropped in October, but sadly, the band aren't around to see it. Wayne Kramer passed away of pancreatic cancer in February, and Dennis Thompson died not far behind him of a heart attack in May. To start on the positives, this album sounds great. Bob Ezrin has done a masterful job of delivering a rock record that meets the modern standard of polish, punch, and volume, but it remains incredibly dynamic, sharp, and rich in tone and texture. It reminds me of the Black Crowes record from earlier this year that similarly blew me away in the levels of depth you don't often hear in the digital age. Time was clearly taken on this record. The production excellence is also achieved without removing much of the potency in the way that the Landau era did. These feel like live recordings. However, I will say that Blind Eye and Can't Be Found, the only two tracks to feature original drummer Dennis Thompson, they do have a totally different and more authentic feel that the whole record, I think, could have benefited from. What I struggle with on this album, to be honest, comes down mostly to a matter of taste, my taste, and that is, in the world of hard rock, it's a tightrope walk between cool, aggressive swagger and butt rock. This genre leans heavily on blues-based riffs, and so much of how those riffs land is in the feel and the delivery. The spiritual elements, the motives of a band need to be so perfectly balanced, otherwise it tips over into kind of macho, kind of try hard, kind of over-the-top posturing. Take Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, for instance. Those are hard rock tracks rooted in the blues, but you add enough punk edge from Duff McKagan and just utter coolness from Izzy Stradlin and a loose feel from Steven Adler, and it feels dangerous, electric, and just pulled back from the precipice. Remove those elements and you have the RAWK rack of like Slash's solo material. You know, Metallica's Load era is just a hair's breadth away from Nickelback. Led Zeppelin is like a notch down from Greta Van Fleet or Rival Sons. Sometimes it's just a special alchemy between people, places, and culture. And I mean, like, fuck knows what it was in the case of Rage Against the Machine, but you take Tom Morello out of there to make a solo record, and the music will have you questioning your love of like Bulls on Parade. Heavy Lifting features so many artists coming in to give it all their all to live up to the legacy of MC5, and of course you would, like, what an honor. But in doing that, it fucks with that alchemy, and on several tracks, like the opening title track featuring Morello, it just tips over the edge into corniness. Brad Brooks is an incredibly talented vocalist, but where Rob Tyner came across those powerful wails accidentally by pushing his love for soul in a slightly more aggressive direction, Brooks is starting at that point. Context is also key. In 2024, it would take a special type of someone to, in complete earnestness, shout, "Let's kick out the jams, motherfuckers," without it sounding cringe, let alone "Live like I lost it all, punch a hole in the wall, gotta kick 'em in the balls," as we hear on this record. What made those early albums, particularly Kick Out the Jams and High Time, so special was, and I keep saying it, the alchemy, the political atmosphere, the free jazz influence, the energy. Some of that was just lightning in a bottle, and some of it you just can't help but lose when the music is put together by fans trying to recreate what they love about the old stuff. Iggy Pop's career is a perfect comparison to this. Most of his weakest stuff happened when some fan with their heart in the right place came in and tried to convince him to put something out that could match or recapture the Stooges, you know, like Skull Ring or Beat 'em Up. people get so hopped up on trying to recreate the product of all these crazy influences and contextual inputs, they miss the fact that those influences and inputs are what birthed the shit that you like in the first place. Wayne Kramer was the driving force of the MC5 though, and for all I've just said, you can definitely hear a core run through this album that hints towards the raw magic that created those early works. Barbarians at the Gate has a great guitar that's straight out of the Motor City playbook, and Ezrin's production does a great job not over cranking the distortion, and it feels very analog. Change No Change has a laid back groove I could envision the original format of the band jamming on, and I Am the Fun is pretty infectious before the vocals get a little grating. Like I said in my recent review of a posthumous release by Alan Vega, it doesn't feel right to say anything less than great things about an artist or band responsible for so much greatness in our music culture, but the MC5 built their legacy on telling people what they didn't want to hear. So, I don't know. MC5 were an important, legendary movement in music, creating ripples that will go on forever. Everyone involved in this record put their absolute all into the performances and the production. And what a thing to be part of, like, fair play. I'm going to give this a 4.6 and knock it on the head and prepare for some heat in the comments, which is totally deserved. This review was written with absolute love, but I don't expect, anyone to agree. If you love it, great. Let me know what you think in the comments. Check out reviews in the description that you might like. And if you can be asked to do all that, subscribe, stick around, share some thoughts, show some love, or just have some abuse in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers, mate. My name, go. Bye.